What is going on, everybody? With the 2026 NFL Draft in the rear view mirror, it is time to break down how these teams did in the draft, how these players fit with their new teams, and of course, talk about how these teams managed to find value in the draft, and ultimately handing out the ever-controversial draft grades. And you know, every year I get comments complaining about draft grades, that they're useless. And I'm, of course, not here to tell you with certainty how every single player is going to turn out. Just like your team's GM, I know I'm not going to be perfect with my own evaluations. But I am here to tell you, based on my own months of preparation for the draft and the grades I have on these players, who I do think maybe did reach on a player that I'm maybe not betting so much on, or inversely, who I think found total steals further down the board. This is always one of my favorite exercises every single year, so much so that I've actually created a grading criteria for these draft report cards. This is so that I can keep these grades consistent from team to team and year to year. And today we're going to be handing out draft grades for the AFC East. And as we get started, if you could do me a huge little favor, and please do hit that like button down below. It's a free and easy thing that really does go a long way towards pushing this video out towards other draft sickos just like you. And if you do, a little football animation is even going to show up on your screen, which is fun. And make sure you subscribe as well so you do not miss any of my draft grades videos. And I'm even going to be revisiting my 2023 draft grades to see how my takes aged from 3 years ago with that class. So you're not going to want to miss that. And I also want to thank Prize Picks for sponsoring today's video. We'll hear more from them in a little bit. And we'll begin today with the Buffalo Bills, a team whose drafts tend to leave me whelmed, I would say. And man, this was a pretty Billsy draft, in my opinion, if it plays out like I kind of expect, where honestly, I think we're going to be a little underwhelmed by some of the early picks, and then maybe we come back and see some impact players on day 3, which is kind of par for the course for how Bean and the Bills have drafted. Now, hopefully with a change in coaching, we start to see some changes, I guess, but and maybe I'm just wrong, right? But we can kind of start that off with TJ Parker being their first pick in the draft. They actually trade down twice, which helps, I suppose. You know, and a lot of people are going to be like, what do you mean? Everybody had TJ Parker in the first round. We're going off my evaluations here, right? Like, I didn't spend 4 months getting ready to the draft to just not give you my opinion on how I saw the player. And it's just a little bit early for me on TJ Parker, especially when this was your first pick in the draft, and you were sitting at 26. And the Bills have really struggled to find true, genuine impact star players on the defensive side of the ball, especially early in drafts. And I just don't think TJ Parker is that. I see a guy that maybe climbs to being like a decent number 2, probably going to be best off as a very good number 3, someone that can play the run, someone that can win with a bull rush, but didn't even do it consistently at Clemson. And it's only going to get harder going against NFL offensive tackles that have the requisite anchor to deal with his impressive upper body strength and that nice long arm rush that he has. I think he's going to be a different style of player, but kind of similar to the guy that just went out the door, and AJ Epinesa. That's how I view TJ Parker, and for that to be your first pick in the draft, I'm not a big fan. I think there were other edge rushers that I would prefer to see them get. I think Cassius Howell, for example, could have been this team's version with Jim Leonard coming in of Nick Bonito. Now, I don't think he's going to be quite as good as Nick Bonito, but someone that actually gives them something a little bit different from what they've had over the years with genuine pass rushing juice. I think some of the interior defensive linemen could have been more fascinating picks here, or just going in a different direction. Maybe you do take like a Jacob Rodriguez, who I think could spark up a linebacker room that needs some love. So like, I think there were just a lot of better picks that either could have been made after the trade down or before the trade down. I think they got another just a guy in this edge room, which is kind of my biggest fear if I'm a Bills fan. And I'm a little bit lower on TJ Parker. There's going to be some people that say this is great. You traded down. You got a first-round player at the top of the second. Anyway, that's not how I viewed TJ Parker. He was actually my number 10 edge rusher, and now we just have to see how that plays out. I hope for Bills fans' sake I'm wrong about the player. And then you go to the end of the second round. where they definitely did some navigating here because they picked up a pick swap from Denver, and then they used that to come up. So they end up getting into the second round after all, after the DJ Moore trade. And they go with Davison Igbinosun, which was definitely a bit of a surprise and something I've talked with Bills fans about quite a lot over the mock draft process is like, we really don't need an outside cornerback is kind of what the conclusion was reached with Bills fans. Now, one player I had entertained with them in mock drafts was Avion Terrell as a slot for this team. And again, I think back to that top of the second round pick, I would have much preferred, I think, Avion Terrell as a slot cornerback for this team. But this was definitely interesting because I do think the Bills have a pair of outside cornerbacks on this team that are good enough to kind of build around here, or at least look at it as not a need to draft an outside corner with this pretty important, like, high draft pick for this team. And Davison Igbinosun is not a slot guy. He is a true outside press jam corner, which this pick is definitely indicative of the idea that Jim Leonard's going to want to come in and have someone that can play more press man coverage. Can Maxwell Hairston not do that for you? Can Christian Benford not do it at least about as well as Davison Igbinosun? I've got questions about that. I really do. I think even Dorian Strong, who was a 6th-round pick last year, has some potential to do that for you. So going with this player at this spot was certainly interesting to me. In fact, we're going to talk about a steal that they got later down the board, and I think Jalen Kilgore projects much better as a starter in the nickel for the Bills. And then you factor in all of that with the fact that it just, did you have to trade up for this player? This is still a little bit early for me on Davison Igbinosun, who, yeah, he's tall, he's long, he's got good speed. He's not a bad press man corner that I think could develop into a decent starter in the league, but he's very grabby. He's a little stiffer. I wouldn't describe him as like, oh, we got to go get this guy. He's going to be a lockdown corner for us. I think best case, he's going to be something like a CB2. So I don't know, man. These first 2 picks for the Bills were kind of head scratchers for me. I don't really see us looking back on these picks and being like, oh my God, they killed it on day 2 of the draft, in my opinion. So both of those picks got C's for me. Before we go any further, I want to thank the sponsor for today's show, Prize Picks, America's #1 sports picks app. On Prize Picks, they have an easy-to-use app where you have a chance and win some money, stringing together lineups where you'll pick any number of player stats, picking more or less on all the sports, all the stats. So whether it's football, picking touchdowns and passing yards, baseball, strikeouts, hockey, you get the point. They have so many options on Prize Picks. They even have team picks now where you can pick the winner, the spread, and totals on any major game. And that's available in most states, including Texas, California, and Florida. And one thing Prize Picks has that I'm excited about is you can follow my handle at TFG_football and follow along with all of my picks throughout the summer. I'll be putting together baseball lineups. I have really reestablished my love of the game of baseball, something that goes way back to when I was just a puppy. But having Prize Picks lineups to give you a little rooting interest and a chance to win some extra money is something I have really enjoyed as the baseball season has already begun. And we're going to be diving deep into the stats and trying to pick some winners when football season rolls around. So when you sign up, Prize Picks will give you $50 in bonus lineups. It's going to be code HMA when you do sign up, or click that link in the description below. So thank you to Prize Picks for sponsoring today's show, and let's get back to it. And then you get to day 3 of the draft, and they have the second pick of the 4th round here, and they go with Jude Bowery out of Boston College. He does have developmental upside. I'm prepared to be, just too low on him. I saw him as certainly later than this, 5th to 6th round. I thought coming right out of day 2 there was still some really good players on the board. In fact, I'm very excited to track as a draft take. Darrell Jackson Jr. goes to the Jets here with the next pick in the draft. That's someone I think I would have taken instead if I were the Bills. If they want more of a long-term developmental tackle prospect and they were like, we got to get that piece first. I understand the process here, but it was early for me. This wasn't necessarily a player I was betting on. I just, he technically has the length and the movement skills and the developmental upside, but I saw a guy that really struggled with the play strength aspects of the game, that leaned a bunch, and they're going to have a lot of work to do if they think he has developmental upside, because if they were drafting him to be a swing tackle and a good backup, I think there were much better swing tackles in the draft that are more ready now for that kind of role as well. So we'll see how his development goes in the league. It just was a little bit early for me. But these next few picks were really good, man. Skylar Bell at the end of the 4th round becomes a really nice value. I think Skylar Bell can be like a quality starting wide receiver in the NFL. Kind of a one-year breakout. Going over to UConn, didn't necessarily go up against the best level of competition, so you're going to see a jump in, what he's going up against there, better corners, all that kind of stuff. But, man, he's got run after catch ability, he's got route running, he's got speed to get down the field. I don't know that he's necessarily going to come in and start for this team right away. But I think he can get there, and maybe he does contribute by the end of the season or something like that. So I do think the value was really good there. And then with the next pick, they take Caleb Elam's-Orr. This is about where I saw him, 4th round, as a traits-based developmental linebacker prospect. He's not entirely dissimilar from Dorian Williams, who they took a couple years, who's kind of gradually gotten there. It's the exact same idea there, which I always recommend. Like, if you've got linebacker needs, like it's not a bad idea to just take an athletic linebacker in the 4th, 5th round every year, because there's a couple of guys like a Caleb Elam's-Orr every single year who have the athleticism, but maybe were used like at TCU, especially like, kind of a weird system, wasn't always asked to do a bunch of like NFL linebacker things, but the traits are all there. So get him in the developmental pipeline. I think that was a good use of a 4th round pick there, especially when they have a linebacker need that I thought maybe they could have addressed earlier. But this next pick, man, was one of the steals of the draft from how I saw it. Jalen Kilgore. He was a total my guy in this draft, and I recognize that he goes a lot later than I had him graded here. But I'm still willing to, bang the drum for this guy, and we'll see how it goes here, man. But I see kind of the ideal modern nickel here in Jalen Kilgore, someone with the size to hang against the run, to blow up screens, really good blitzer off the edge. He's got tremendous ball skills. His production and ability to get his head around and find the football was outstanding. He had like 20 passes defended over the last 2 years. 21 to be exact. He's still young, declared as a true junior. The testing profile's off the charts. There's a lot of footwork and some zone IQ stuff to kind of get him up to speed with for sure. So I don't know that he'll be your day one starter in the nickel. That'll probably still be D. Alford, but I wouldn't be stunned if by the end of the year, and I'll be honest, like D. Alford, decent coverage player, but probably the worst run defending nickel in the league. I was surprised they gave him even as much as they did. I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of the year they just get tired of D. Alford getting caught up on blocks, not making tackles, and make the change to put Kilgore in there. And he could really have a big impact on this defense in the long run. He's got potential to be more of a safety as well. I just, for what he did at South Carolina, I think he showed he has the instincts in that part of the field that I wouldn't overthink it. I would keep him there, especially because the best stuff he did was kind of finding the ball and making his presence felt around the line of scrimmage. Not necessarily like as a deep safety. Maybe he surprises there, but this was too good of a high upside prospect in a position that, especially a big nickel like this in the modern NFL has become so valuable. This was very close to the highest rated player that I had on my big board that the Bills drafted overall here in Jalen Kilgore. He ends up 53rd on my big board. I had TJ Parker 48th. So I'm excited to track this one as one of my, bigger day 3 takes coming out of these draft grades videos. And I hope he can, just based on how I kind of saw this draft, I hope he can kind of help make some value back for the Buffalo Bills, which again, we've seen this in Brandon Beane drafts where, the best player came in the 5th or 6th round. We've seen that multiple times before. But after that, you get Zane Durant, really good athlete out of Penn State. That's about it. But excited to see Jim Leonard kind of get someone that's more of a scheme fit for them. They have a bunch of these athletic, undersized interior guys already, though, like Ed Oliver, TJ Sanders, Dwayne Carter, Zane Durant, right into that kind of cluster of guys, and we'll see what he can do. This was about where I saw him going, so nothing crazy here. Not a player I'm necessarily betting on, but he's got decent enough potential with the crazy athletic ability that he has. Then you get Toriano Pride at the 7th round spot there. Par for the course, just someone that ran a 4.3 and likes to tackle, and his coverage stuff was all over the map. So let him cover kicks and see what kind of development you can get him on there. They take the punter with the 23rd pick there, and then Armaj Reed Adams, a guard out of Texas A&M. Very strong player, but pretty clunky feet on top of that. Wasn't my favorite tape that I watched. I figured he maybe would get drafted, but, very end of the 7th round was right about where I had him. So those last 4 picks were just kind of whatever. I don't think they stole any big impacts or anything like that. Not necessarily guys I'm betting on. But one undrafted pickup for them before I give the final grade here on the Bills. Keep an eye on Desmond Reed if he can stay healthy. He's been banged up a bunch at Pitt, but I genuinely saw something like a Tariq Cohen clone. For those that remember Tariq Cohen, man, I'm getting old. It doesn't feel like I should need to say that, but I know a lot of younger fans probably don't know who Tariq Cohen was. Just jitterbug, like human joystick of a running back at 5'6", 5'7". There we go. Now I got the attention of the younger kids. But yeah, 5'6", 174 pounds. He actually was my number 10 running back, understanding that a guy that small with injury concerns might go undrafted. But in this running back class, I thought he had some decent potential as a 3rd down back. So we'll see if he can stay healthy and make this team. If he can, I think he could become a, maybe the long-term replacement for like Ty Johnson, who's been, that kind of like designated 3rd down running back. But there's your Bills draft. I gave this one a C+. Just not my favorite draft. I think their first 3 picks were extremely underwhelming to me, and that's just kind of hard to get all that excited about. I don't think Parker and Igbinosun were like the worst picks in the world, but just certainly I would have liked to see them go in a different direction. But they do make up some value on the back end, and hopefully Jalen Kilgore, especially with that 5th round pick, can be a monster for them. But at the end of the day, man, I have not really loved Brandon Beane's drafting. I know a lot of Bills fans are kind of tired of him, and I know I've spoken to a lot of Bills fans that are like, man, this is just another draft that we could have gotten so much more. We're so tired of not taking that leap as a team, and I kind of think they dropped the ball again for the most part, if I'm being honest. So we'll see how that one ages. But let's go to the Miami Dolphins. It's going to take a while. This team made a bazillion picks. They are hitting full reset on this garbage roster of theirs with the new regime coming in. And this is a really fun draft, man. I'm excited to break this one down. So let's just get started. They take Caden Proctor with the 12th pick after moving down a spot with Dallas. And this was a B-graded pick for me. We have my grading criteria that I'm following to keep things consistent here with these teams. And based on my eval on Proctor, like there were better offensive linemen available. He was the 25th player on my board, and you take him at 12. It's just a little bit early, and that results in a B. They're going to take him. They're going to play him at guard in year 1, and eventually maybe will be a tackle. So, I think Vega Wane was a better guard prospect. I think there were other better tackle prospects. Now, there's aspects of this pick that I do like as well. It's a pick that I do actually kind of feel like I'm higher on than a lot of people. Number one, I think a lot of people just think Caden Proctor sucks, and that's just not the case. I think especially as a guard, he has outstanding upside, and he might just stick there long term, and you're really happy about that. So I don't hate the idea of saying, look, we got a guard now that has tackle upside in the future. I think there's rationale behind that, because Vega Wane is not going to go out and play tackle someday. And then the other thing with Proctor that's fascinating to me is like he had a lot of hiccups on his tape because he's got really heavy feet and had a lot of losses against quicker hitting pass rushers because of that. That's how he ends as my number 6 offensive tackle. But he's got a little bit of interesting kind of fog of war on his evaluation in the sense that he's dropped a bunch of weight. Alabama had him playing at like 375 pounds, and that's just not necessary. And he's done a good job to drop weight and get down, I think, under 350 pounds now, and hopefully will continue to go down to about 340 is where I want to see him play at, kind of around the weight that Tristan Wirfs has largely played at. And if that drop in weight allows him to pick up his damn feet a little bit more, I think you're talking about a really exciting high upside tackle. So I see a world where this does end up worth it, and he ends up looking like a really good franchise tackle or even an all-pro level guard with the 12th pick in the draft. I think that's a perfectly good pick, worthy of a B grade here. Just not an A for the reasons we kicked things off with there. But then they move up a couple spots and they get Chris Johnson, the cornerback out of San Diego State. Makes total sense to me. As a fit in a Jeff Hafley defense that's going to run a ton of quarters, off zone style coverages. They'll mix things up. They'll go cover 2. They might want to run some more man-to-man. Chris Johnson was a brilliant zone coverage corner at San Diego State, so much so that I compared him to Casey Hayward, who spent some years in the league as a kind of a top 5 corner and someone that was always applauded for being amazing because of his zone IQ, the way he sees the game, jumping routes, reading the QB's eyes, you name it. Like, there's some really awesome zone coverage tape out there for Chris Johnson, which oftentimes gets underrated. A lot of these teams want the, tradesy press man corners, and they're like, oh, we can teach him zone. Well, a lot of times it's proven that it's hard to coach zone instincts like Chris Johnson has. So I think he's a great scheme fit. He ended up with a top 50 grade for me, which is basically like, I prefer him in the second round, but if it's the end of the first and you want to pull the trigger on him, I'm totally comfortable with Chris Johnson there. It fills a huge need. I think he's going to be a really good number 1 corner for them. Just has to make that jump from San Diego State to the next level, because he really didn't face a lot of big wide receivers or good wide receivers on his college tape. But the ones he did face, he put in a box. So I'm all about the Chris Johnson pick there for the Dolphins, who honestly, after Jermod McCoy happened and he falls to the 4th round, I think after Mansour Delane, Chris Johnson is the cornerback that makes the most sense in this draft for this Dolphins team and where they were picking there. So I gave that an A. And then, dude, getting Jacob Rodriguez in the middle of the 2nd round, phenomenal. He was roughly a top 20 player in this draft for me. The rare, pro-ready impact linebacker, in my opinion. Really balanced player in terms of run defense and coverage ability. And then his ability to just take the ball away is real. The peanut punch, stripping the ball, baiting quarterbacks in coverage. Like, this is, to me, something like a Darius Leonard was for the Colts, where you might be able to nitpick some things with his run defense or with his coverage, but someone that has just crazy instincts and gets you those game-changing plays in big spots, I think he's going to be able to do it the next level, man, and that's why I had such a high grade on him. And I think he falls because teams are betting against those instincts and looking at a guy that has some minor dings in terms of, maybe not a traditional first-round linebacker prospect in terms of high-end run defense, elite traits, elite coverage potential. I think he's just very good across the board with incredible instincts on top of it. And you put that next to Jordan Brooks, by the way, and another guy down the board that we're going to freaking rave about in Kyle Lewis, I start to get pretty excited about this Dolphins draft, man. I do. So that gets the highest grade I can give these picks, which is an S for steal. Love that pick in the 2nd round for the Dolphins. And then they turn around and make one of the worst picks in the draft, in my opinion. So the roller coaster here is on. Caleb Douglas in the top half of the 3rd round. I can't get there, man. He was my number 38 wide receiver. I didn't even think he was the best day 3 wide receiver out of Texas Tech. I had a 6th round to a priority free agent grade on him. I just didn't see this at all. And I am willing to bet that the other 2 wide receivers that they end up in this draft are much better players than Douglas, who they actually took first out of this crop. And I wouldn't be surprised either if this one just kind of got away from them, because the pick before this, we saw Malachi Fields go to the Giants. And we talked about this in the NFC East draft grades video, that after Fields, there really wasn't an X wide receiver left in this draft. You're probably talking about either Douglas here or maybe like Sturdivant, who went to the Packers undrafted. So they could have very well just panicked and said, we need an X wide receiver. Crap, Malachi Fields just went. Who else is north of 200 pounds, north of 6'3"? Let's take that guy, and maybe panicked into this pick. Now, that's pure speculation, but that's kind of what this feels like, because it's a guy that, yeah, he ran a 4.39. I didn't see that speed in his tape at all, one bit, whether it was going through all his targets, which I did. I had him tape estimated at a 4.59. He plays very slow. He's not a dominant ball winner for an X. He's not a great run blocker. I don't understand this at all. Someone I'm definitely fading as this big of a draft pick, but it's okay. They turn it back around and get one of my favorite players in the draft, not one of the best players in the draft, but just someone I really like what he brings to the table. They move up a couple spots and they get Will Kacmarek out of Ohio State. He is very similar to how I felt about Jackson Haas last year to the Bills, who I had a 3rd round grade on. He went in the 5th round, and I just was like, dude, if you can get a true run blocking guru, like true inline tight end that allows you to play 12 personnel, which we know they're going to want to do in this Shanahan style offense, that will block. And Kacmarek can give you a little bit in the receiving game. He's not going to be this fantasy superstar. He's not going to be someone that everybody gets excited about, like, Greg Dulcich, who's in here and had a good year last year. But look, this is the pick that allows Greg Dulcich to do what he is actually good at, to play on the wing, to be a, quasi slot wide receiver. You take Will Kacmarek and plug that next to it, and that could actually be a surprisingly good tight end room for this team. So I wouldn't have been surprised at all if someone else was targeting Kacmarek. They felt like they had to trade up and get him. It's not like they gave up that much to do it. So I'm a big fan of that. I gave that pick an A. And then you roll the dice on Chris Bell at the end of the 3rd round here, someone that almost certainly would have gone in the 2nd round, if not for the fact that he's coming off the ACL injury and is going to be a little bit late to business here. Now, he might be able to play this year. He tore his ACL in November, or maybe even late October. So you might be able to get him sooner rather than later here. But he's a really fun player. He's some combo of like a Deebo Samuel and Rashee Rice in terms of the skill set. We'll see if he can reach that kind of upside. But he basically just only ran crossing routes and was a run after catch demon at Louisville. But he has theoretically the speed and size to prove to be a better, vertical threat for this team. I do think in a Shanahan style offense, which is all about run after catch, capable wide receivers, pulling away on crossing routes. They definitely like run blockers with size. Like, Chris Bell is the perfect fit in the vision for this offense. And as soon as he can get healthy, I think he can absolutely be in competition for who this team's best wide receiver is. And not to mention, look, the Dolphins, they're going to try to compete this year, but if any team was in a position to draft Chris Bell, it was going to be these true rebuild teams that maybe can give him a redshirt year and make sure that ACL is fully recovered by the time he gets out there. But I love the process on that one. Definitely had become a value where they got him. That pick got an A for me. Then we take a deep breath and reload for day 3 of the draft. They've already made 6 picks, and they make 7 more on day 3 of the draft. They kick things off getting Trey Moore at the end of the 4th round. So I didn't write up Trey Moore. I had seen some of them just in watching the Texas defense. He was on my radar. I knew he was going to get drafted. He's kind of a hybrid defensive end slash linebacker type. He reminds me a decent bit of when this Packers regime last year kind of rolled the dice on a guy out of Oklahoma State in Colin Oliver. So, he's kind of a developmental athlete at edge. I didn't have a final grade on him because I didn't finish his write-up in time, but, decent enough flyer on athleticism, and there's just not that many edge-type prospects with upside left on day 3 of the draft, so decent enough pick. Not someone I'd necessarily be betting on, but maybe he can surprise. But, dude, let's talk about Kyle Lewis with the, last pick or just at the ass end of the 4th round. My God, man, he was a top 50 player in this draft for me. I knew there was a good chance that he could fall when I placed that type of grade on him because he's kind of this tweener, unique, scheme fit. And I called this out in multiple videos. I was like, he could fall because there's probably only about 8 to 10 teams in the league that will see him as a fit in their defense. Kind of needs to be a 4-3 style team, or a team that views Kyle Lewis as kind of a Nicky Manwari-esque true dime safety or a nickel corner. And this seems to be exactly the right spot for Kyle Lewis, where he's on a 4-3 style team. The Packers did run base 4-3 a decent amount of time last year with Jeff Hafley. That's his background. So when they're in base, which will be about a quarter to even a third of the time with a guy like Kyle Lewis, he's going to be that true weak side linebacker. But what's interesting is I've seen him listed at times as a nickel as well. And there's a world where they look at this and just say, you know what? We're going to go big nickel base here. And whether you want to call it a 4-3 or a 4-2, we don't care. This allows us to stay, in the same base style defense, but be able to match whatever personnel you want to come out in. And this is if you're talking about what the Bills do so well, what the Jets are going to be doing now that they have 2 tight ends that we'll be talking about here in just a minute. This is perfect because it's you're coming out in 12 personnel and you think we don't know how to handle that because one guy's kind of half wide receiver, half tight end. Well, here you go. Here's Kyle Lewis, who's half linebacker, half nickelback. And he's just going to be out there all the time. I freaking love this. And I really hope that they don't do anything crazy by trading Jordan Brooks because you now have, to me, Jesus, man, this is kind of a hot take, but I could see this being the best linebacker unit in the league this year. I mean, you already had an all-pro there in Jordan Brooks, so I don't think it's that crazy. I think Jacob Rodriguez is the perfect pairing with a Jordan Brooks, and now you put Kyle Lewis in this unit? Dude, that gets me pretty fucking fired up. This is one of my favorite picks of the entire draft. The scheme fit for Hafley to be able to deploy this guy. I think this is the perfect modern nickel defender if utilized correctly. And I think he went to the one, maybe not the one team, but he went to one of the teams that's going to truly understand how to use this skill set. I will go as far as saying, for the gambling folk out there, a little Kyle Lewis defensive rookie of the year, which is probably going to be crazy odds, it's worth it because he's going to be in a situation to get interceptions. They're going to blitz him a bunch. He's a guy that could end up with 4 picks and 5 sacks and win defensive rookie of the year, in my opinion. I'm that high on this pick. I really hope I'm right about it. Calling it just a steal doesn't feel like it's doing it justice. I get pretty fired up about this one. So congrats to Dolphins fans on that one. But then they take Michael Taff. I really like this pick in the 5th round. I had a 4th to a 5th round grade on Taff. I definitely thought he needed to go to a split safety oriented defense, which was likely to happen considering 2/3 of the league are in that type of system. He's not a big enough safety. He's not a good enough tackler to play down in the box consistently. But he is a really good coverage defender with fluid hips, good speed, good coverage feel. I think he starts day 1 for the Dolphins. And to find that, who to me in this point was the best safety available, he was my number 7 safety in this draft. I think that's awesome. And he maybe isn't the forever plan with a ton of upside just because the run defense could prove to be an issue for him. But considering their starting safeties right now are Dante Trader and Lonnie Johnson Jr., I wouldn't be surprised at all if they put him out there and see what he can do. And then I have to take a deep breath and get all freaking revved up again, because if I thought Kyle Lewis was one of the biggest steals of the draft, I think the Dolphins may have had the two biggest steals of this draft, getting two of my guys in this entire draft. I also had Kevin Coleman Jr. just around the top 60 of my big board with a true second to a third round grade. He was a top 10 wide receiver in this draft for me, and he's probably, I don't know, 24th, 25th wide receiver drafted. Crazy to me. At least Kyle Lewis got some love and got some buzz out there. Kevin Coleman Jr. got buzz around the Senior Bowl up in like January, and then everybody just stopped talking about him. And I don't understand why. Excellent route runner, really good athlete. He's awesome after the catch, and he had an 81% contested catch win rate and caught everything at Missouri. I compare him to Emmanuel Sanders. Like, that's who I see in this player, as an undersized guy that's just really tough, gets open, but can actually get down the field and make some tough catches for you as well, on top of doing, like, having an easy projection as a slot wide receiver in the NFL. I mean, what's not to like about a guy that has his ability off the line to get open and catch the ball as consistently as he does and produce after the catches he does? Like, that is a baseline, at least made him a better player than some of the slot guys that got drafted ahead of him. Guys like, I will say, Antonio Williams that goes to the Commanders. Like, I think Kevin Coleman's a much better player than that. And then the guy can actually get down the field and make tough catches. Like, I don't understand how this is a 5th round player. I don't. So they get him on top of all this. And with Chris Bell dealing with that ACL injury, I will double down on my Kyle Lewis, like, defensive rookie of the year bet as a really good value. I think Kevin Coleman Jr. leads this team in receiving yards this year. And I just released, shameless plug here, I just released my Dynasty rookie rankings for my Patreon supporters. So if you want to check all those out and support my channel in the process, that's over at patreon.com/thatfranchiseguy. But Kevin Coleman finished 16th for me for my fantasy draft, dynasty rookie draft rankings. And the reality is, you probably don't have to take him that early. You can probably get him in the 3rd round, which is incredible value. But anyway, obviously love that pick. And then they take Seydou Traore out of Mississippi State. Got a fun spotlight being a part of the what do they call it? The NFL Academy in London, where he kind of began his NFL dreams, started at Arkansas State and kind of got gradually better every year playing at Mississippi State. I didn't finish his write-up, but he was very much on my radar. Really good athlete, developmental upside. If Dulcich isn't going to be, continue to look good like he did last year, Traore absolutely, as a wing tight end, he's not the biggest guy. He probably doesn't project as like this dominant inline blocker, but someone of speed and run after catch ability next to Will Kacmarek, he could absolutely have upside to become an impactful quasi-starting tight end for this team. And then they take DJ Campbell, another guy out of Texas here, and another guy that I didn't get to. I did 284 players this year, just run out of time to watch all these guys, but he was very high on my wish I could get to list because his measurables stood out to me. 6'3", 315 pounds with long arms, played guard, but I think that profiles as a center. So I think there's potential there. Again, just kind of looking at the traits there. I wish I got to the tape and had a final grade on him and all that, but I think solid process was, certainly felt like a draftable prospect to me. And then they wrap up their draft with Max Llewellyn out of Iowa. I felt like I was a little bit lower on consensus on Llewellyn, but I still had a 5th round grade on him. Just to kind of see if his weird, wacky skill set would translate to the next level. Like, he produced in the Big Ten, and he's 6'6", 260 pounds. He's got really short arms, and he wins with Euro steps and swipes and quick feet. He wins with purely finesse, and I just worry that without the kind of speed and get off, without the power, without the arm length, I just kind of worry that his skill set's going to translate to the next level. And I also just don't really know where, what role does he have? Because he's actually really bad against the run. He's upright and has shorter arms. And I just don't know that he's going to be a dominant pass rusher to be a designated pass rusher type. So I don't really know necessarily where he fits long-term, but it's a late 7th rounder. And he had good tape at Iowa and was draftable to me. So I actually think it was a good pick just to kind of see if this works out. And for now, he'll at least be a part of the rotation and maybe can get you some impact plays here and there by kind of fooling some linemen with those quick hitting rush moves that he has. And then the Dolphins did have a couple of undrafted free agent steals as well. They get Louis Moore out of Indiana. The dude's like 26 years old and he plays like it. Like, this dude was always in the right place at the right time, but old, small, slow. Like, that's just a tough sell on draft day. So I'm not stunned that he went undrafted, but dude, I wouldn't be surprised if him and Taff are starting together and Moore absolutely played in that split safety style defense. Like, he is gonna step into that safety room. And I wrote this in the draft guide actually. And I wrote that he's gonna piss a lot of veterans off by stepping in there right away and just being better than a bunch of safeties. Like, he's going to be around the ball. He's going to be, competing for starting jobs and just be probably the smartest guy in that safety room immediately. I don't know if he can hold the job forever with his traits, and he is already a little bit older. But as an undrafted pickup, like, yeah, absolutely, especially for a team that has no starting caliber safeties right now. And then Renee Conga as well. Really good athlete, someone to get going on stunts and loops and games, which they will absolutely do here. Wouldn't be the least bit surprised if he makes this team as well, just in a specific role. But yeah, I had a 5th round grade on him. Why not bring him in as an undrafted free agent? So tough draft to grade for the Dolphins because the Caleb Douglas pick happened and I just don't understand how that occurred. So I can't give this an A+. But with the amount of value they stole between Jacob Rodriguez, Kyle Lewis, and Kevin Coleman, and then really nailing a bunch of other picks as well, I did ultimately give this an A. And I think this is a really fun start to the Dolphins' new regime. I think you can look at this and have a lot of confidence in the new GM, excited to see what Hafley can do with all these different pieces. And again, really fun, exciting starting point for the Miami Dolphins. All right, then we have the New England Patriots, who begin their draft by moving up a couple spots for Caleb Lomu. I think we had the Patriots trying to get a tackle in every single mock draft we did for them. It just makes way too much freaking sense with Morgan Moses, who managed to stay healthy last year, but with his age, with what we saw with this offensive line when it wasn't playing as well, and just knowing like the drop-off in tackle after Lomu was pretty freaking devastating, man. There was a couple swing tackle options out there, but there was really nothing after tackle 7 in this draft of like feeling pretty good that you're getting a franchise tackle. Caleb Lomu was kind of in his own tier alone after those top 6, and those top 6 guys disappeared, right? So to come into striking distance to get Lomu, it was sound strategy for what this draft was. I don't think Lomu is a can't-miss prospect. I think he had a lot of losses on tape. He needs to get stronger. I really like the idea of him sitting for a year. But I think he can get there with the right coaching here, and I think they have good coaching here. So I do like the pick. It's not like some tremendous value. You had to trade up for a guy that was more of a top 50 player for me. And to get ahead of it a little bit, I could see some people saying, well, the Dolphins did the same thing for Chris Johnson. You gave that an A. Well, Johnson was 35th on my board versus 40th for Lomu. And with Johnson being just such an ideal scheme fit and filling such an immediate need, I feel better about giving that pick an A. Lomu, to me, is a little bit more of a risk as a prospect. So take it or leave it. That's my explanation. But we did go with a B, which is still a very good grade here. And hopefully he can turn into the franchise tackle that they need there. Then they come up again and get Gabe Akis in the 2nd round. And this was early for me on Gabe Akis. However, when you look at how the board fell, these edge rushers just started flying, man. And again, kind of the same deal with Lomu, where it's like, okay, it's a little bit earlier than where I like the player. However, it does fill a need. They needed some more bodies in that edge room. And if you didn't get Akis, who else was it going to be? Because even though he was my edge 12, like, look, Josh Josephs, Romello Height, those were, designated pass rusher types, not the same type of like 3-down potential player like Gabe Akis. Jayshon Barham is more of a project type, and then Danny Dennis Sutton I don't think is good at football. Like, I think Gabe Akis is at least good at football. And I was lower on Keon Crawford as well, who was the next edge off the board. So I understand the process of like, crap, like we might need to be a little aggressive just to come and get someone that can play right away for us and help fill out this defensive line. Now the reason I was lower on Akis is I just don't know that he's ever going to be dominant enough as a pass rusher to be a guy that you feel good about as one of your 2 edge starters. Like, I think he's really good against the run. Like, I can't take that away from him. But someone that just doesn't have the twitch, get off, athletic combination to really project as a high upside pass rusher for me. I like that he uses a bunch of different moves. Like, he's a craftsman and he's going to be decently effective. But talking about like, second round, I still want to find a guy that can become a true 3-down impact starter for me. That's just not what I saw in Gabe Akis. I think he's going to be much more of like a Kingsley Enagbari type, who the Jets just signed in free agency, whereas an edge 3, someone that's a tone setter against the run and can get you the occasional win in a big spot as a rusher. That's more of how I project Gabe Akis. So that's how we landed at a B for him, but I do think he plugs right into that rotation and can fill that role that we just described immediately as a quality edge 3 for you. And then you go to the end of the 3rd round and they take Eli Raritan, the tight end out of Notre Dame. Good pick, in my opinion. Not like crazy value or anything. I had a 4th round grade on him. They take him at the very end of the 3rd. So it's not like ideal value or anything like that. He's far from a can't miss prospect. He's got a long ways to go, but 6'6" guys like him aren't supposed to move like Eli Raritan can. And he can stretch the seam. He made some really impressive over the shoulder catches at times at Notre Dame. A guy that's missed a lot of time for injuries. He's torn his right ACL twice in his, I think, starting in his high school career, which kind of slowed his, early development and that kind of stuff. And just not a super consistent blocker, inconsistent moments with his hands. Like, I would just describe this as a high upside tight end that was, still growing and really just inconsistent across the board at like everything you could watch for the position. So I do like him getting in behind Hunter Henry, who's like a best case scenario for a guy like Eli Raritan, and become a better blocker. Learn some of the in and outs of the position while maybe competing as well in a tight end 2 type of role after they lost Austin Hooper. So I think it's a good spot for him. And to plug my like fantasy rankings one more time, he's tight end 4 for me in this from a fantasy perspective. Just because the upside is really there for him to emerge as a quality starting tight end. So not some like unbelievably amazing pick or anything, but par for the course. I gave that pick a B. Then you get to day 3 for the Patriots, and I was pretty underwhelmed by what they did here. They take Kayron Prunty out of Wake Forest, and he was not on my radar. We were looking up his athletic profile in the live stream, and it was like, man, I see why they could have maybe fallen in love with this player because he did test really well and has some really good traits. So, I think it's a solid enough process. If they think this is their guy, we'll see what he can do. Unfortunately, I didn't get to his films, so I can't have too strong of an opinion on this. But the fact that he was so far off the radar, like even Dane Brugler had him like in the 60s for him. So, this has to be one of those situations where the Patriots know something we don't, but maybe they found something there. I have a hard time being overly critical of that pick. I just can't get overly excited about it either. Then they take one of my least favorite players in this draft, Demetrius Crownover out of Texas A&M. I can pretty confidently say that of the 284 players that I watched this year, this was the worst of them. Just horrible, like made my eyes bleed type of tape at Texas A&M, where you're talking about a 5th-year guy that had just the technique of like an 8th grader that you just started to ask to play football. He was my lowest ranked offensive tackle with a 7th round of priority free agent grade. The only reason I have a 7th round grade on him is because he is 6'7", 320 pounds, 35.5-inch arms, and tested decently well. Like, this is the classic, like, oh, we can fix him because Texas A&M's coaching staff couldn't do that in 5 years with him. So just the definition of a guy that I would have let someone else draft. I think you can find better players where they were picking, like whichever direction you went. But you're going to be, right next to Caleb Lomu there, who's going to be learning a lot of things. Maybe he can, attach to that very involved coaching process that they're going to be investing a lot of time in with Lomu. Maybe he can stay attached and get better. But I'm just not a fan of that pick, to be honest. With the 31st pick in the 6th round, they take a developmental athlete in Nnamdi Obiazor. He played kind of a, weird outside backer 3-3-5 role. He's got decent run and chase skills, developmental special teamer. Maybe can get better at linebacker in time. They spend a middle 7th round pick on Byron Morton out of Texas Tech. I didn't finish the write-up on him because when I was watching those Texas Tech wide receivers, I saw enough to kind of get the point on Morton, where he doesn't throw a great deep ball, not an accurate one at least, not a lot of traits to like, a lot of ugly reads and stuff. So I kind of got the point on him, and consensus didn't like him either. So I'm confident enough to say that they're going to regret not taking Garrett Nussmeier here, who ends up going to the Chiefs. And look, I do think Nussmeier has potential starting upside someday. You're obviously not looking for that here if you're New England, but I think Nussmeier is someone that okay, if he does get starts, whether May goes down or it's week 18, he's the type of quarterback that, not only do you get an actual capable, cheap backup in the 7th round, which brings a ton of value. Good backup quarterbacks make $8 or $9 million, but he's also the kind of guy, we saw this with this team, with a team taking an interest in their backup, and they got added draft capital in Joe Milton. I think take Nussmeier. If he gets one start and looks good, someone's going to give you a 3rd or 4th round pick for that. So I'm really not a fan of doing that. I know it's a 7th round pick, but let's have good process here. Let's try to get the most out of these picks, even if it's further down the board. And I don't agree with that process. Jam Miller as well. Another guy that I don't think he's a good football player, man. I think he's a poor man's Miles Sanders. So an athlete that doesn't really get it at running back. No instincts, no vision, no creative elusiveness or anything like that. I mean, he was one of the lowest ranked running backs I had in this draft class, and that's saying something. I thought based on the traits, yeah, sure, you could maybe justify drafting him, but I think there were just better running backs that they could have gone with. I think Jamari Taylor out of Virginia actually knows how to play the position. Noah Whittington, Roman Henby, those guys did end up going undrafted, but I think they were better. So I just, it's not the end of the world. It's not going to derail their draft grade here. I feel like they didn't really take good football players on day 3 at all. And honestly, all 5 of these picks are all just kind of traits-based flyers, which is fine. And then they take the hometown kid out of Boston College and Quintavious Hutchins, who I'm pulling for, man. I mean, I didn't finish the write-up on him, but I did watch him because he went up against a bunch of these ACC tackles that I watched, and I kind of got the point on Hutchins, just didn't get around to finishing his write-up. But he's a crafty guy that just has really unfortunate traits. He's under 240 pounds, under 6'3", ran a 4.74, just not a combination of athleticism and size that is typically a prerequisite for getting after the quarterback and stopping the run at the next level. But sure, as the 31st pick, take a guy that is going to come in and compete and give it his all. So I went with a B- on the New England Patriots. What they did on day 1, day 2, I think was all totally reasonable, but nothing was outstanding value, kind of the definition of a B grade for day 1 and day 2. And then for me, obviously, I hope I'm wrong, but if I'm giving my honest opinion on what I saw from day 3 of this draft, I think they lit 6 picks on fire. And that takes what for me is a B draft down to a B-. So they can still get some contributors out of this draft when we look back at it in time. But you are also, I will say, very much betting on coaching and development, because for the most part, they took developmental types of guys. I think Gabe Akis is what he is. He brings a nice high floor as an edge 3. We talked about Hutchins down the board, but everybody else here is kind of not good at football currently. Lomu's okay currently, and just has the traits that you need to coach up. So that's really what's going to make or break this draft is coaching and development for these guys. And that's also just with like full disclosure that they might have found a diamond in the rough in Karan Prunty, who was just really not on the radar. But having not watched his tape, I'll reiterate, like, wouldn't be surprised if they found something here because he had an 85 coverage grade per PFF, 6'2", tested great. Kind of looking at myself on this one, like, yeah, he might have just slipped through the radar. So I am very interested in that one. It's pretty rare for a good football player to slip that much through the cracks, though, in today's draft environment. So we shall see on that one. All right, then we have the New York Jets. Very interesting draft to talk about here. At the second pick in the draft, basically the first pick in the draft, you could have had anybody at any non-quarterback position in this entire draft, and they choose David Bailey, who, look, what's the point of doing this for 4 months and diving into the tape and having all these opinions if I'm not going to give my opinion when the actual draft happens? And David Bailey was the 18th player in the draft for me. They took him at number 2. I think that's a really bad pick. I gave this a D. I see a guy that does bring a nice floor as a pass rusher, something like what Bruce Irvin did, who came out, but Bruce Irvin was the 15th pick in the draft. I see David Bailey in a normal draft, unlike this one that was lacking a lot of blue chip talent at the top at premium positions, though I think there was one in Ruben Bain that I'm willing to say, like, I think we look back on this in 3 years and say, wait, why didn't the Jets just take Ruben Bain instead of David Bailey? Like, there's all these other great prospects. Like, I think Caleb Downs would have been a better pick. Trading out of this pick, I think Arvell Reese has a higher upside as an edge rusher. So many other different directions I would have preferred to see this team go. But yeah, I think David Bailey is someone that's going to be a pretty solid pass rusher with his speed, with decent power and a spin move that can work at the next level. I think there's a solid floor as a kind of like number 2 speed rush oriented player. But there are just a lot of buts on David Bailey. Like, he is not a good run defender at all. He's got a really skinny lower half. He doesn't anchor well at all. He tries against the run, but he will get moved off the ball. He's not going to be a great early down edge defender for you to help you get to third downs. And then as a pass rusher, like, while he has a high floor with his speed, his ability to threaten the arc, that spin move that is very nice, there's a lot of issues with him as a pass rusher as you project him to the next level too that makes me say I don't think he's going to be a super high upside pass rusher. Certainly not worth the second pick in the draft. Again, you could have had anybody in this draft. The context changes when we're talking about the second pick in the draft. So he's not bendy. For a speed rush oriented player, he cannot turn the corner. He's extremely dependent on that straight line speed. The majority of his wins come against tackles at okay, I get it, like, the Big 12 is like the Big 12, but let's be honest about the tackles he's facing. They are not NFL tackles. You can see clearly on David Bailey's tape that these tackles that are giving up these sacks cannot get the requisite depth to match NFL level speed. NFL tackles will be able to take away David Bailey's trump card way more often. Now, I've said this, like, there's going to be some weeks where David Bailey meets a backup tackle and he might get 4 sacks that week because that get off and ability to just run straight at the quarterback can play for him. But beyond that, when NFL tackles are able to match that speed rush, and by the way, a lot of these bad quarterbacks he got to face just simply didn't step up. So even if the tackles were good enough, these bad quarterbacks were screwing the tackles over and just continuing to get depth where David Bailey just had to keep running upfield. With NFL tackles being able to match the speed and NFL quarterbacks just stepping up in the pocket, what else does David Bailey bring to the table? He's got decent power. And he, again, has a spin move that can work, but NFL tackles will be more prepared for it when it's his only counter. And I don't think David Bailey has a great understanding of how to set moves up and stem a pass rush plan together. Hopefully that can come at the next level. That's to be determined. That's what's ultimately going to make or break this looking like a decent pick compared to a horrible pick, is if he can start to set up inside counters and understand how to go to those more often. Because he didn't have to do it at Texas Tech with his physical advantage. But I do ultimately see a guy that's like gonna have some barriers to being this dominant number one edge rusher that I don't think Ruben Bain does. I don't. Like, say whatever you want about the arm length. That dude can go through anybody and has all of the pass rush moves in the bag and is much more bendy than David Bailey. I think Arvell Reese has incredible upside. So look, man, I think this was a bad pick. I gave it a D. We'll see how it ages. That's what's the fun of this. And I fully understand, like, David Bailey is not going to be a useless NFL player, like I said. But I think that there was a lot of noise coming out about the fact that, Aaron Glenn making this pick, like, he's worried about his job security, and, they didn't want the project of Arvell Reese. But that's kind of how bad teams stay bad, is they make decisions like thinking of their own job security in terms of what's just the best pick. So that's out there. We'll see how that ages. Again, that's the fun of all this. I could very well be wrong, and he's going to be, Robert Quinn. Like, great. Let's see if it happens now that the opinion has been laid out there. Now, I kind of like the rest of this draft. I kind of love the rest of this draft. I think Kenyon Sadiq at 16 is great value. I'm excited to see him dropped into this offense. I think the biggest thing to watch with this pick is what weight does Mason Taylor come in at this year? Because Mason Taylor was super young, coming out of LSU, wasn't a bad blocker, but was just a little bit thin, and he's been working on bulking up. I especially love this pick if this means they're telling Mason Taylor, hey, can you please get up to like high 250s? Doesn't need to be 260 necessarily, but become a true inline wide tight end, which I always thought was Mason Taylor's best upside, was to stop playing at 240 pounds or whatever. And he was young when he was at LSU, so you could understand why he was lighter. But I thought the effort as a blocker was always there. And he's not this like outrageous athlete like a Kenyon Sadiq to be this like mismatch F type of tight end. So if Mason Taylor can fulfill his potential as a full inline wide tight end, I think that will open up the opportunity for Kenyon Sadiq to reach his full potential in a tight end 2 / wide receiver 3 role. And I've been talking about this throughout the process. People get all, butthurt about it when I say I'm not drafting Kenyon Sadiq to be my number one tight end. I mean that as a compliment. I mean that in the same way I said, how Brock Bowers is used with the Raiders, where you are able to tap into all of the things he can do to screw with defenses as a matchup problem. Yes, an individual matchup problem where he's too fast for linebackers and too big for corners, but a schematic matchup as well, a personnel matchup problem where you don't know how to match this team in your, whether it's base or nickel, and they can kill you either way with a guy like Kenyon Sadiq, who's a great slot wide receiver and a functional inline tight end, especially off the wing in 12 personnel. It's not that Kenyon Sadiq can't block. Like, he actually really gets after it. And when he is blocking as a slot wide receiver or off the wing, he's an excellent lead blocker. He has plenty of strength to deal with outside linebackers and slot corners and safeties. But if you're just drafting him to replace Mason Taylor and you're going to be an 11 personnel team most of the time, I have questions about that, because I don't think that's going to maximize what Kenyon Sadiq is. But I'm optimistic that that's going to be the path here and that they're not giving up on Mason Taylor. I think Mason Taylor showed enough last year to make this the plan. And we know that teams are trending towards 12 personnel being a heavy, throwing a heavy dose of 12 personnel at people after what the Rams and the Seahawks especially did last year. So I like going in that direction for this team. We'll see if Frank Reich is the coach to make that shift. That's to be determined. That's a whole different segue. But let's go to the next pick in Omar Cooper Jr. So if you're going to be a 12 personnel team, you do need another wide receiver here, and preferably someone that can flex in line a little bit, block a little bit more, be a really good run after catch threat off of play action. And honestly, my only criticism of the Kenyon Sadiq pick at 16 is I was like, why not just take Omar Cooper Jr.? Well, they get them both. So that's fucking awesome for the Jets. Like, I love this. You have an offensive line. You have a super squad of weapons now. This is like setting up to be an ideal situation for a quarterback to be dropped into this thing. So much so that, like, if Cade Klubnik gets on the field, I wouldn't be surprised if he starts to get some buzz. But I think for Geno, like Geno could absolutely turn his career around with this situation. And then you're setting up maybe a really healthy infrastructure for the first time for the Jets, where you might have a healthy infrastructure where, all right, Geno plays well, you get a 2-year extension, and then we draft a guy next year who doesn't have to start right away, like genuinely can sit for a year, and then you actually have a franchise quarterback. Like this could really, really pay dividends. And I love getting Omar Cooper, who was my number 2 wide receiver in this draft, was the, I think, 15th player on my big board. I've been a huge fan of him throughout this process. I always come back to saying on Omar Cooper Jr., tell me what he doesn't do well. And Cooper was actually 13th on my big board, now that I double check that. But he runs good routes. He catches everything. He's tough catching the ball through traffic. He's awesome after the catch. Clutch his nails. Like, he run blocks. Like there's just everything to love about Omar Cooper Jr. And I really hope for his sake the Jets do get some stability at quarterback to get the most out of him and all these guys, because it's exciting, man. And then D'Angelo Pons in the second round. This is perfect, man. And this is about the range where I liked D'Angelo Pons as well. Kind of outside the top 50, which you're just outside of that here with the 18th pick. But anything outside of that, because I think if you take a corner in the top 50, you're hoping he's going to be like a true number 1 corner type for you. I don't think that's going to be D'Angelo Pons. I think eventually his size deficiencies will give him enough, just inconsistency dealing with bigger wide receivers. But beyond that, I mean, he's scrappy as hell. He's really good at like all the different coverages, like man-to-man, off zone. Like you could do whatever you want with him. I think he can play in the slot. He can play outside. You just drop him into this secondary that's got a bunch of questions. Someone also, and sorry for not giving the right credit here, but someone did the kind of like physical comp between D'Angelo Pons and what Aaron Glenn was as an undersized, scrappy corner, and it's identical. Like it makes so much sense that Aaron Glenn was going to love D'Angelo Pons and want to coach him. So that is exciting. Like I'm not the biggest fan of Aaron Glenn as a coach, but I do love his mentality and great defensive backs coach. Like I'm really excited to see what he can do with D'Angelo Pons. And I end up giving this pick an A. I think this is kind of exactly what you should do with this pick. If you're the Jets, you're filling a need with a player that makes total sense. So that's a ton of fun. And then you do go to the top of the 4th round. And we hinted at this earlier. Like, I think Darrell Jackson should have gone on day 2. And he doesn't last long on day 3. I think he's got, like, really solid starting potential. He was inconsistent at Florida State. And I lowered him a tick because I hadn't watched. So he was my inside my top 50. And then I hadn't watched his game against Florida yet. And then I was doing the Florida offensive line, and I noticed Darrell Jackson like taking plays off, like really noticeable like motor concerns in that game. Pad level came up. Not a good game against your in-state rival. It was a little bit of a turnoff. I bumped him down a little bit into the lower 50s. I think he finished probably like 56th. We're referencing the big board a lot here, but he finished 58th on the big board, but still someone I really believe in the upside. And when he is playing with his hair on fire, he does it all, man. I mean, he is a first man off the bus type, has power, has quickness, defends the run. Like, I think if you can get him motivated here, I think you could have stolen, honestly, like a pretty solid starting 3-down defensive tackle. So I think that's a steal at that point. And then they do trade up. They invest a couple of 4th-round picks to come up and get Cade Klubnik. I'll be honest, like I'm not a fan of that. I think you could have stayed put and hopefully gotten him 18 picks later. And even if you didn't, I don't think it's the end of the world. Like he is a definition of a backup caliber quarterback. And I understand they're looking at this thing and saying, we got Geno now. We're going to take a quarterback next year, but we do want to fill out one of these draft picks, one of these roster spots with a cheap backup QB. I understand like targeting Cade Klubnik. I just don't think you had to trade up to do it. And again, Garrett Nussmeier, better quarterback prospect, in my opinion. Same criticism we had on the Patriots on Cade Klubnik. And maybe they were afraid that Nussmeier was going to be too good, that, they end up like talking themselves into not drafting a quarterback in next year's draft. That's kind of like the Desmond Ridder criticism I had on Atlanta. So even if you throw that criticism out the door, I still think trading up to take this guy early, still just not my favorite move. But, Cade Klubnik is solid as a backup quarterback. I actually think he made some really impressive throws on the run for a guy that doesn't have a very strong arm. He's a decent distributor of the ball. And if Geno gets hurt, I wouldn't be stunned if Cade Klubnik actually plays all right. I don't think he would play so well that they, don't draft a quarterback next year. But in this infrastructure, I think Cade Klubnik could be decent. But again, from a value perspective, it was just a little bit rich. So I gave him a little bit of a ding on that. And then they take Anez Cooper out of Miami. I thought that was a pretty good pick. He's my 13th interior offensive lineman with a 5th round grade. He's strong as an ox. He's not a great athlete. So you want him to be in a more of a north and south blocking scheme, which is historically Frank Reich is more of that inside zone kind of Andy Reid tree type of run game. So he's a fit there. I think good value, man, on a guy that was a good offensive lineman on that Miami team. And he's just kind of a brick shithouse that's, I think, at least going to be a decent backup. And he's not entirely dissimilar from like what John Simpson was as a player either. Obviously a lot younger and still has to prove it. So I wouldn't be stunned if they have an injury and he steps in and he looks like a pretty good backup guard in the 6th round. That's nice. And then VJ Payne at the very end of the draft, 7th round. So I was not a VJ Payne fan for where people were talking about him, more like 3rd, 4th round. I thought I was going to end up, not really liking this as a pick wherever he went, but he falls. He falls to the 7th round, which I think his tape justifies that. He's not good, especially as a safety. He has really bad instincts. He doesn't tap into that 4.4 speed very consistently. But something I've seen as a suggestion in multiple places. Zach Hicks, who covers the Colts, I think was the first person I saw this from, but I know Trevor Sycamore's talking about it, but let's get this guy playing press man corner. Let's change his position to be a corner in Aaron Glenn's system. If that's their choice here, I actually could see him working out because he is 6'3" with 4.4 speed. But as a safety, I don't think he really gets it. So this, at this point, like, I did think that athletic profile was worth drafting. And I wouldn't be stunned if they kind of move him to outside corner and he figures it out. So we'll keep an eye on him. And I didn't see any notable undrafted free agent steals there for the Jets. But giving a grade to this draft was tough because honestly, like the David Bailey pick for the weight of being the 2nd pick in the draft, probably my least favorite pick in the draft. I know that sounds especially harsh, but I really do think like the context of it being the number 2 pick matters, and we're going to look back on this, and whether it's Reuben Bain or Caleb Downs or even like a Mansour Delane or Arvell Reese, if the Giants can do things right with him and that crowded room, I just think there's going to be so many better players in this draft class, and the Jets could have had any of them. And they went with a guy that I think is going to be a pretty solid pass rusher in the NFL. And I think that's bad process. So it's hard for me to get all the way away from that, but everything else they did, other than spending a little bit too much to go get Cade Klubnik, was awesome. So I landed on a B for the New York Jets. Still a draft that you could look back on and say, man, this kind of got things back on track for Aaron Glenn and company, even though maybe it could have been even better with that 2nd pick in the draft. But that's going to do it for the AFC East grades. Please do let me know what you guys think of the grades. We had some moments of being a little bit more critical in this division. I feel like especially the NFC East was kind of a lot of great drafts. NFC North was pretty dang good. Here we had certainly some larger takes, which I think is the fun of all of it. And I can't wait to revisit this in 3 years and see where I was right, see where I was wrong. Just please do hit that like button if you enjoyed. Let me know your comments, where you think I am right, where you think I am wrong, and make sure you subscribe. I mentioned revisiting these 3 years later. I'm going to be doing that here, within a week or so. Going to revisit that 2023 draft, which I'm looking forward to, but I'm not looking forward to because that had one of my worst draft takes of all time when I hated the Lions draft with Jahmyr Gibbs and company. So we'll get ready for that. But I at least have another week of my life before I'm reminded of that. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Cheers.